Sometimes seasons are referred to as roller coaster rides for Miami. It was one huge swoop up and then a drop in the final three games, of course, from 10-0 to 10-3. We bring in Isaiah Kim Martinez from Miami Hurricane, the campus site for Miami football, to discuss the Canes and a bright future despite a bitter ending to 2017. Isaiah, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. So I know you're focused on basketball and really liking the prospects of the Canes on the court here. We're going to bring you back to football and have you kind of recount what happened near the end of the season. The Pitt performance was mediocre and forgettable, but they had another chance in the ACC championship game. Not many people gave Miami much a chance in that one, and but they just didn't play well. And then, of course, blowing a 14-3 lead against Wisconsin in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, it's not. You don't see too many seasons that kind of went how Miami went. You know, they set so many different records. They beat FSU for the first time in 8 years. They win the Coastal for the first time since joining the ACC. And everything's kind of going in the right direction. And suddenly you lose to Pitt, which is a game that, some people were like, okay, Miami shouldn't have lost that game. But teams reach bumps in the road. Then Clemson happens, 38-3, and you're like, wow, like huge blowout. You don't know where that kind of, a team where you see Clemson that just dominated Miami in almost every asset of the game, pretty much every asset of the game. So you look at that, you're like, okay, so where do we judge Miami now? Was Clemson just that good, or is Miami maybe not as good as the number 2 ranked team, which was as high as they were ranked by towards the end of the season? And then going into the Wisconsin game was kind of like that test for Miami. I was talking to people around campus basically saying that this is kind of the real test of how Miami's season, what type of team are they by the end of the season? Because Pittsburgh, you could say, all right, maybe that's a fluke game. Clemson, you could say, all right, they're just in another league. But Wisconsin, you could say, all right, they didn't make the Final Four either. They didn't make the playoff. Where does Miami stack up with these upper echelon but second-tier teams, if you will? Maybe not the ones that can win a national championship. So Wisconsin, they came out to a big lead early on, or not a big lead, but 14-3. They showed some ability to score the ball early. But then as the game went on, you saw what Wisconsin's quarterback did. And Miami, throughout the season, has allowed some big performances to the opposing quarterback, similar to what Hornibrook did in that game. But Miami played that one close. There were some problems towards the end. The kicker missed a couple of key kicks. Rozier made a couple of interceptions, which Mark Richt said were not his fault. They were good reads. It's just some of the plays were just great defensive plays by Wisconsin. So I would say that was a pretty well-fought game by Miami and showed that overall, when you look at the season, pretty weird the way you look at it. You win your first 10, you lose your final 3. It's like, how can you really call that type of season a success? But at the same time, when you look at that last bowl game against Wisconsin, Miami showed some good signs going into the future. And clearly that quarterback position, the coaches have said it already, but from that game alone, you can see is pretty much up for grabs going into the next season. So Miami 10-3, kind of ugly the way it happened. I wouldn't necessarily call it a success, but I would say obviously a step in the right direction. And next year, I definitely expect more consistency on both ends.
Yeah, the way it turned out, you would have to say it's kind of on the border for most Miami fans, the realistic Miami fans who weren't thinking after 10-0, okay, we're winning the national championship, but the ones who thought, hey, this would just be phenomenal if we could somehow continue this run and make it to the Final Four, but thought, okay, we understand that, okay, Pitt, we shouldn't lose to Pitt. We're not going to lose to Pitt if we play them 10 times. That's probably the 1 out of 10, but it shows some maybe immaturity of a team that's not saying, okay, we're right where we need to be and we need to close out this regular season. And then you go to Clemson, and of course, even realistic, and I would probably put you in this bunch unless you're going to surprise me on this one, Isaiah. You didn't expect to beat Clemson, but you wanted to put in a good effort and show that you could hang with them, that you could play within a couple touchdowns. And, of course, that fell apart quickly, but you didn't have Amon Richards or Christopher Herndon for that game. So that definitely hurt being able to hurt Clemson in the passing game. And then, yeah, Wisconsin was a really good barometer as you sized it up. Here's a team that, like Miami, lost its conference championship game and would be considered in the top 5 to 12 teams in the country. So there you go. And I think the one surprising thing for me in that game was, when Miami was playing well and grabbed that lead, the brute force of Wisconsin versus the athleticism and speed of Miami, which was the stereotypical matchup, seemed to be coming to fruition. Miami's too fast for this team. They are just exploding off the ball on both sides of the field, and especially on defense. They just look like they're just beating Wisconsin's offensive line, getting into the backfield, and they're just too much for Wisconsin. What surprised me was when Wisconsin came back, it wasn't with the ground game. It was wide receivers beating what's considered one of the better secondaries in college football. I think that was the one aspect of it that was fairly disappointing and surprising to me about Miami's play on that night.
Yeah, it was. They were known for their running back, who was one of the best in the country, and offensive line, who also one of the best in the country, and defenses that can make some stops. And when you really look at that game, the quarterback for them played such a bigger role than he had pretty much throughout the season. I believe it was something like 25 touchdowns, 18 interceptions. He played his part, but he really managed the game for that defense to make stops, for that offensive line to give the running back protection, and he had the 4th or 5th most rushing yards the entire season. So when you look at them, they were built off of a run game, and they were built off other aspects, not necessarily the quarterback flinging it like crazy. But when you look at that game, running back had a good game. I believe he hit 100 yards, but the story of the game was the quarterback Alex Hornibrook getting 4 TDs, no interceptions against that Miami defense. Like you said, that was really like something that you hadn't necessarily seen from Wisconsin. That one freshman, his name escapes me, but I think he had 3 touchdowns in that game. A wide receiver had a big game. So elements of Wisconsin that you didn't necessarily expect came to fruition, which kind of, I guess, left a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth, yes, as a Miami fan, ending that game.
Your thoughts about Malik Rozier's development or maybe lack thereof throughout the season, and if you really want to see a serious quarterback battle in the spring and in the summer?
To answer that question, yes. I would love to see a battle between whether it's him and N'Kosi Perry, who's expected to be more developed at that point as a sophomore. He should be in the competition. And even Jaron Williams, the 4-star dual threat QB out of Georgia, who Miami's pretty excited about, the fans are excited about. He's expected to play a part in the competition. May not necessarily win it next year. Obviously, it's tough for a freshman, but you can never really gauge that too early. But as far as Rozier is concerned, it's interesting with him because the one thing that made him so much different than Brad Kaya, that gave Miami this different element on offense, was his mobility. And there were many games, even if his arm wasn't working for him, where he would be able to extend plays, he'll be able to get first downs with his legs, which was something that, Kaya couldn't do, which totally added different element, and it actually helped Miami in a lot of situations, even against Wisconsin. Some of the plays, especially in the first quarter where they were scoring, Rozier was able to extend plays with his legs. But consistently throughout the season, whether it be against, some of the upper echelon teams or some of the worst teams, he consistently showed the inability to make the consistent throws on an every down basis. Some throws would be perfect. Other ones would be way high, low, deep balls especially. Some of them on the money, some of them way overthrown, underthrown. And regardless of what, obviously the coaches know best when it comes to which interceptions are the fault of the quarterback and which ones are not. I agree with him against Wisconsin. Some of the plays that were made were just great plays on the ball or just an unlucky tip that got intercepted. But Rozier did struggle at points in those games, like he has in almost every game this season, maybe outside of a couple of them in there. Maybe Notre Dame, he managed the game pretty well, but he has struggled in that consistency, which you really need to be one of the top teams, at least to manage the game and consistently get first downs. The big stat you look at for Rozier on third down, Miami was just not good in that last game. I believe they were way under 50%, no doubt. Wisconsin outplayed them by a great margin in that game. Third down conversions was an issue for Miami throughout the season, and a big part of that, falls on the quarterback. If you're on third down, third and long, chances are you're passing the ball, and Rozier a lot of times struggled in those situations. So when you look at his season, he broke the Miami record for most total touchdowns by QB in a single season. That is an accomplishment on its own, and you can't undermine that. But at the same time, for a Miami team that's looking to make that next step, you need more consistency. So I'm looking, definitely there will be a competition, but I don't expect him to be the guy to be under center as the starting quarterback next season.
On the line with Isaiah Kim Martinez from Miami Hurricane. Enjoy the discussion here on Miami football. And when you mention next step, that leads me right into it. So when you go 8-4 and win a bowl game against West Virginia, then the next season you start 10-0. And even though it's a disappointing and you do win the division, you do reach the ACC championship game. So now comes maybe the tougher step, because as you take the steps, they become more tougher because the losses are against the really good teams, and then you're going to have to really climb to reach that next plateau. So for Miami football, what would be your expectations for next season? And then thinking about it being a really young team, as far as my thoughts of the personnel, you're going to lose some guys, of course. But when I look at the key positions and the key players and the standouts across the board on both sides of the ball, most of them seem to be coming back. So you seem to be in pretty good shape for next season.
Yeah, it's like you said, that next step is sometimes the hardest one. And you saw Miami against Clemson. They were just not there yet this season, and you could see that. So then brings the question, all right, they're a good team. They're a good program going in the right direction. Where do we go from here? When you look at their team next year, it's like you said, they didn't lose a lot of players. They're getting, at least for right now, they got a lot of them back. Jaquan Johnson's a safety who will be a senior next year. He's coming back. Michael Jackson was, I believe, at least tied for the leader in interceptions on Miami on the team this season. He's coming back. He plays corner. So those are two members of the secondary coming back from Miami where they need experience. So that's huge. Their linebacking core all will be juniors. They're going to come back, which is great. The one area on the defensive end that you see some problems is both Kendrick Norton and RJ McIntosh, who played a big part for Miami this season, as well as some other players like Trent Harris, who are seniors. They're all gone. We're talking about pass rushers. We're talking about guys who, make a difference on the defensive line, who make a difference in disrupting the rush, for other teams. They will all be gone. So you look at that element of Miami's defense, and you're going to have to, typically expect to put some freshmen in there at times, or be rotating guys who haven't necessarily had that experience. So that'll be one area for Miami that, will bring up some questions like the secondary did going into this season. We don't know how it'll play out, how well they'll play early on. But that defensive line, in order to be one of the best teams in the country, in order to reach that upper echelon, you need to be able to control the trenches on both sides, both offensive and defensive. And that defensive line will have some holes as far as guys leaving. So that brings up a question. Will Miami be able to dominate in that area next season? We don't know. But anytime you lose a couple of your guys who are starting in that front, brings up some questions. As far as the offense, for the most part, everyone's coming back. They're losing Barrios, but almost all the receivers, you still have Travis Homer in the backfield. You retain the majority of your offensive line. Obviously, Rozier and the quarterbacks will be playing in that competition. Lorenzo Lingard, one of the top running back recruits, comes in, adds to that. Their offense should be able to take that next step next season. What I expect for them is, in order to improve in that area, you need to maintain that consistency. You need to get that consistency. So Miami needs to reach that point. As far as their recruits coming in, at this point, they're getting a lot of the guys that Mark Richt has been recruiting. You're starting to the golden era guys, are starting to leave. And you're really starting to get some of these top recruits. They have a top 10 recruiting class for next year, and a lot of websites it's top 5. So when you look at that team, the talent will be there. It's just a question of experience and if Miami will be able to make that step next season. My expectation is next season won't necessarily be the one for Miami. I think it'll take at least a couple more years, only because you still have holes in certain areas. And I really think that Miami really needs some of these recruits coming in to develop with the ones we already have from Mark Richt's recruiting classes to really take that next step.
So that's what's impressive, is what you're alluding to right there, that in the midst of a late season swoon, you lose the last game against Pitt in late November, you lose a championship game in a bit of an embarrassing fashion on national television. And in the midst of that, you've got to sign an early signing class, and it comes through, even though you've got one of the top programs in college football in Clemson, and Florida State, obviously in the middle of all that talent in Florida as well, right there, always hauling in the big classes. And it's Miami that comes up with the best class in the ACC, based by all the major services. 247, number 1 in the ACC, number 6 overall. And now it's pretty much in the books with by by last count to 19 guys signed and only one guy still hanging out there as a hard commit. So the work is pretty much 99% done, and it's the number one class in the ACC.
Yeah, you look at that, and obviously Mark Richt has said many times we've hit a home run. He said we hit a home run in the early signing period. He's really happy about that. He was tweeting about that. Coaches are happy. The players are happy. But it's more than just recruiting. Obviously, when you're a program that's trying to reach a top, that is the first thing that comes to mind. But it's also timing. You got to have guys who, obviously, players in college football, by the time they hit their junior year, their senior year, that's when they're at their peak. That's when they're the most experienced. And Miami kind of needs to get all those guys to come at the same time. And I think we're still kind of waiting for that a little bit. A couple of those linebackers are going to be juniors next year. And obviously we still have the Canes still have some young recruits that are really talented who kind of trying to come into their own. So I think until they can get that experience together where it's like you have the recruits that you get from those classes who are in their junior years or older, I think until then you won't necessarily see the team reaching the top 4, the top 5, and competing with the likes of those like Alabama and Georgia on a consistent basis. But they are going in the right direction. Recruiting obviously is such a heavy part in it, but I think it's more than just the talent. They need to get that experience together with all these top recruits as a team.
So I'm counting 9 of these 19 signees from the early signing period are rated in the top 10 at their positions. So it's an elite class. Nesta Silvera, a defensive tackle out of Fort Lauderdale, 15th rated at his position, the only one left to sign. He's a hard commit. Again, according to 247 Sports, number 15 at defensive tackle, committed February of last year. All right, Isaiah Kim Martinez breaking down the Canes for us, wrapping up 10-3 in 2017, looking for better finishes to the season starting this fall and a quarterback battle that may ensue starting this spring. Isaiah, we appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.